The natural world is complicated. The water, the weather, plants, animals, all influenced by countless variables over millions of years that help guide their behavior. What we do know is, for the most part, living things are a product of their environment. They've evolved over time with the species around them. They know the rules, they know the players, and they found ways to coexist. When an invasive species comes into play, things change.
When we think about introduced species that arrive somewhere, we're often worried about that they break the rules of the game. The checks and balances that you have is being broken by species that arrive without their suite of natural predators or diseases. So then they can outcompete a lot of the native species, become super abundant, and create ecological or economic problems.
The big problem with invasive species, particularly invasive plants, their definition, by definition, they are non-native plants, so they're coming from someplace else, which means any of the insects here have never seen them before, that they don't have the adaptations to be able to get around their particular chemical defenses. And the other part of the definition of an invasive plant is that it's aggressively displacing native plants. So you have a plant, and around here it's typically from Asia, from China, that is aggressively pushing out the plants that are now supporting the wildlife around us. They look like plants, they look like they're contributing to the local ecosystem, but almost nothing can eat them.
So there's lots of different ways that invasive species can end up here. Of course, there's a lot of unintentional hitchhikers that maybe, come over on a cargo ship or come over on the wooden pallets that are holding a lot of our goods. But there's also a lot of intentional introductions. We might order these in over the internet. You might want like a new tropical fish or some interesting aquatic plants for your aquarium, for example. But what happens when you can no longer take care of it or you need to move? In many cases, a lot of times these get dumped into a local water body. Now you've introduced a new fish species or a new plant species that can easily take over because that lake or that water body is not adapted to that new species.
Invasive species are not new, and some are quite famous. There's the cane toads that took over Australia, the snake that ate all the birds in Guam. There's the war on carp, the fish that walks.
It's got dagger-like teeth, a monstrous appetite. It even walks on land.
The plant that burns.
A plant called giant hogweed, an invasive species that contains skin-burning sap.
It was hard to imagine you could have a scarier name than killer bees. Until murder hornets. But most invasive species aren't obvious. They look like they belong. A plant you've seen by the road, or another bug in your house. But look deeper, and you'll start to see why they are a big problem.
Not all introduced species become invasive. The vast majority of them will just stay benign because very often we have a form of biological control that's not human intended, but it exists just out there. There are predators, generalists that will take out a certain species. Not all insects that are introduced are problematic. Not all plants, the vast majority of them that are introduced are not problematic. It's a few that escape those limitations that we have.
These limitations are the key. Invasives that lack biological controls can take advantage of a new environment. An environment where they essentially have free rein. So what happens when these natural controls are taken out of the equation? To answer that, it might help to ask a local.
So you can think even about a native species, and a good example may be deer. They were under control by mountain lions and wolves and bears when Europeans arrived. One of the things that they did to protect their livestock is they were taking out the big predators. Initially, there were enough hunters out there to shoot for subsistence, but now that has declined, and deer have responded in the way that they always have, having fawns, and they grow in their populations, and now the biological controls, the organisms that were eating them before, are no longer there. But it's not the responsibility of the deer. Deer just do what deer do. It's our responsibilities because we took the biological controls away.
It's all about maintaining balance among what we call trophic levels. You have plants, you have the things that eat plants, then you have the things that eat those plant eaters. So plants, herbivores, predators. In the case of the deer's an herbivore. It eats plants, but we've taken away its predators. So it explodes. There's nothing to control it other than cars, and that's not a good control measure. Don't have as many people hunting as we did anymore, so people get mad at the deer, but it's not the deer's fault. It's our heavy hand of humans that are fooling around with the natural balance between trophic levels that has always kept things chugging along in a balanced way.